right. Welcome into what is sure to be an exciting episode of the CannaBiz Conversations Podcast. I am your grateful host, Sean Welsh. I'm so fortunate to be able to do this gig, and especially on days like today, when I get to have someone that I was introduced to a long time ago as far as their content, what they do, and then it was able to come full circle only because of this wonderful show we have here. So I'm excited to get into it, but as is customary with this season, we do have sponsors, which I'm eternally grateful for. Today's sponsor is my buddies at Colorado Seed, my guy, Peter Schweda. If you don't know who he is, the guy is so much fun. He's so exciting, and he's been doing this for 30 years. And he likes to focus on what he calls step one for cultivators, which is genetics. That's what his seed company specializes in. They take great care pairing the correct strains with the facility specs, your staff, your experience. Builds foundation with not only them, but with your consumers. So great dude. Check him out at coloradoseedinc.com. All right, let's get into today's exciting guest, Lauren Carpenter, CEO of Embark. Lauren, how are you today?
I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. We are grateful to have you making your time. I know you are a busy woman making things happen in the California cannabis scene. So we like to start off with an origin story, and we like to find out how and when did Lauren first find the plant. Lauren, take it away.
Okay, it's a multi-pronged journey, which I think is true for most people. So it's funny, I was actually just telling someone this story. I hadn't thought about it in a long time. So my freshman year of high school, I went to a small, very conservative, religious, private high school. And freshman year, the kids started dabbling with the devil's lettuce, and the school freaked out, and they sent this super intense letter home to all of the parents, right? That the sky was falling, and it started with a prayer and it ended with a prayer, the letter, for our souls and salvation, basically. And so my parents, so it's a Friday and I get home from school, my parents sit me down at the table, and fortunately I have, great relationship with my parents and was pretty transparent, but so they sit me down and they're like, hey, we got this really crazy letter, right? Like, are you one of these kids smoking weed? Like, what's going on? This was wild. Like, there's prayers, all right. Like, this is just totally insane. And I was not one of the cool kids. So I had not yet started experimenting with cannabis. And so I just sort of said, like, no, you guys, honestly, like, it's not me. And, you never know, are your parents going to believe you? Are you going to get in trouble? Whatever. And my parents both looked at each other and they kind of smirked. And then they turned and they looked at me and they're like, look, here's the thing. Like, don't think that you're going to be this little badass running around and sneaking around behind our backs, right? Like, if you want to try weed, I'll call Steve and I'll get some weed here in 20 minutes and you can try weed, So ironically, and I'm sure this was probably their grand, like, parental Machiavellian plan, like, just the very notion of my dad calling his buddy and getting weed in 20 minutes, I was like, oh, this is not cool, right? Like, I'm not going to be cool if I smoke weed. Like, this is the lamest thing ever. So ironically, that did a pretty good job of discouraging me from trying cannabis for a little while. So my parents being like pretty cool about it, I was like, wait, this is wild. I'm good. Thanks. But like all teenagers, of course, there was, some experimentation that came after that. I am a very anxious person. And so I would say that was not super successful experimentation. I think you set yourself up to fail when you do anything because you're trying to fit in or be cool. Like, I just think that's generally not a great approach. And so I think, for me, interestingly, while I sort of dabbled prior to this becoming like a passion and then a career, it was only after I met I started dating this guy who ultimately now is my husband, whose dad very much used cannabis medicinally, and sort of seeing and experiencing that firsthand. That really, I would say, is like, that resonates more as driving my purpose than, my high school experimentation and my parents being too cool and discouraging me from cannabis. But that's why this is sort of a multi-pronged journey to get here.
Yeah, no, I wanna go back to the idea that your parents were cool with it, or the idea that your parents were even maybe into it. I love the idea that it's like an immediate turnoff for kids, right? It's like, well, my parents are into it. Like, I don't want to do that. I'm not old. I'm not like that. You know what I'm saying? So, and I wonder if it was part of the plan, or if it sounds like they're just downright cool about it, especially if they already know Steve, right? So they don't have to take any real, like, we're not having to go distances here. Lauren, did you grow up contextually? Did you grow up in California?
Yes, in Sacramento.
Okay, so you grew up in an area that has always, I don't want to say always, but I grew up in the Midwest where it was everything was from California. Anything we learned about cannabis when I was younger was from, California. It was from the West to the east, if you will, right?
Yes, because we have the best cannabis in the world. Thank you very much.
She said it. She's part of the growing scene. I have no comment here. Look, I enjoy it. I enjoy it. But Lauren, this is going to take us off on a tangent, but we have this like pesticide problem. So I don't know how we deal with all of this stuff.
Okay, we'll unpack that in a different conversation.
All right, we'll let that go down. So when it goes back to the origin story, you're in high school, you see it going on around you. This letter that goes out to the parents, what was it? Was it like suspensions? Were there threats of like what was going to happen to you as users, or is this seriously like a salvation letter about your soul and where you were headed?
Both, for sure. It was both.
Wow.
Yeah, the carrot and the stick. The carrot, of course, being the opportunity to save ourselves, and the stick being it getting in trouble. But I think, it's super interesting as I think about sort of what I do now, which is very focused on normalizing and destigmatizing cannabis. It's funny to think about that as my first sort of meaningful interaction with this, right? That was like from the outset, right? It was like very demonized and strangely wrapped up in a lot of sort of weird religion drama as well, right? And so it very much felt like devil's lettuce, right? Like this letter about the devil's lettuce and in so many ways.
Yeah, and it's funny because, I remember when I first heard about it, it was like, all right, yeah, whatever. And you talk about anxiety, which I think is, you sort of said, hey, going down an adventurous road of anything, trying to be cool, trying to fit in. And I've kind of seen that evolution with the concept of microdosing, right? So I think it's something that you have to go into with care and understanding and a drive and a plan. And so I've been someone who's been doing it for a long time, and I've always really enjoyed it. And I'm not a microdoser of cannabis. I'm like an all doser of cannabis. When I microdose, it's about psilocybin. It's about taking myself and just a little bit different, but it's not about anxiety. For me, it's about mind unlocking, right? That's what I've always used drugs for my whole life. I'm someone who can be in front of a camera. I can be on a stage in front of 1,000 people. None of that worries me. What worries me is getting all this stuff in my head organized, right? And like trying to get it to go places. But my wife, she's the one who, when I first met her, so quick story is when you were telling your story about your husband, I thought it was going to have a parallel there because my wife and I was my wife's drug dealer. That's how she met me. It was through like all these other people. And we've been together 21 years now. And so when it happened, we hung out at her house and I said, yeah, all right, well, take a hit and we'll head out. And she's like, what? I'm like, what do you mean what? Like, take a hit, we'll head out, we'll go out to dinner, whatever. She's like, no. I'm like, no, what? She's like, we don't go out in public. I'm like, whoa, dude, what are you talking about? Like, what kind of usage are we under here? She's like, this is the deal with the anxiety. I'm like, yeah, to go outside. She's like, no, to just be here in my skin. I'm like, no, it's not going to work for me. I'm like, we drive high, we go to work high. That's how we roll. She was just like, no. And now 20 years later, she's not like that. But because I learned that right away, it was a joking effect with her. But to your point, it was like, hey, we need to step into this. You need to like learn how to, operate and do things that you want to do while also having a little bit of the edge off. Because she doesn't drink. She's never drank. So I think everyone has vices. I think you just need to find out what they are and how you corral them and what they do for you. But Lauren, from your perspective, as a user in California, you've grown up alongside of a movement, let's face it, right? So like it hasn't been like totally taboo. It hasn't been locked out. I still live in a prohibition state here in Wisconsin, so I don't get to enjoy it. But what was it like growing up alongside of a movement as soon as you found a passion for the medical side? What was that like?
Well, I think, it just gives a totally different context. And I think it really is sort of foundational to my belief in our market today. Despite trials and tribulations, I I have context of literal decades of sort of pre-policy work. We have decades and decades of folks, multi-generational folks that have sort of built this movement in this community. And then you layer in sort of post 1996, the fact that this was I wouldn't say normal. I think folks in the cannabis industry think it was more normal than it was at that time. I think there was a cannabis community that had embraced cannabis, but I think there were a lot of Californians. I see this in my work today and 2024 that still don't understand the movement. And so I think it's been really interesting, going through your teens and your 20s in a place where this was both accepted and highly used by your peers, but also completely demonized still by a lot of folks here. I think that, I'm really fortunate to be in California, which is the birthplace of a lot of rich history and legacy and tradition. But I think that certainly what I've learned as an operator in this space now that goes community by community is there are a lot of communities that have very strong opinions about this still, where, it still isn't normal in a lot of California.
It's still not accepted, right? And that's the whole difference of this idea of things with cities being able to opt out and all these other things. I'm a business guy first, so I don't really get it, because I get the business side of cannabis where it makes sense, taxes, etc. It was one of the first battles we had in Colorado when it was medicinal, right? We wanted to open a dispensary in a town, Lauren, and so I don't have kids. And so we show up to this meeting to do the planning with the town, all this other BS, and someone's like, hey, yeah, did you know that my kid's school's 500 yards from where you're looking to do whatever it was? It wasn't that close. And I was like, yeah, but you're failing to mention the 14 places you could buy booze that's around your kid's school, and then don't even throw in the cigarette spots. I think that people, you said it, people think it's super normal because they've grown up this way. So I have an 18-year-old nephew who is in Illinois. And so at 18, instead of worrying about when he can go drink, he's like, hey, at 21, I can start buying this legally. And it was like, yeah, you're so cool about it. And so we're in Wisconsin, we're at a baseball game. And he's like, Uncle Sean, you want to have a joint? I'm like, are you out of your mind? He's like, what's the problem? I'm like, first of all, you're in public spaces, which isn't even as accepted as you think it would be, right, unless you're in New York. And Lauren, if you haven't been there yet, under legalization, there's nothing else to smell. I think the city smells better, if I'm being honest. I've been there before. I think, and people are super offended. Every restaurant you go to, people bitch about it. Every bar, people are bitching about it. Not me. I got to walk around that whole city with a joint the entire time I was there, and nobody gave a shit. Nobody stopped, and all I did was smell people the whole way in the best way possible. So, but yeah, the movement, I think you're right. I think people do normalize it quicker. But firsthand how much effort is still ahead in the conversation of normalization. I mean, so what you do, Lauren, you're the CEO of a dispensary group, right? You have multiple locations. Talk to me about what was the family, Lauren? What did Aunt Sally, what did Uncle Ralph, what did they think of what you do or when it was happening, or how has that sort of thing evolved just within your own household, if you don't mind for a second?
Yeah, of course. I think, like any family, acceptance exists on a spectrum. So I'm really my immediate family is very supportive. I actually started this business with my husband, and my parents were huge in encouraging us to do this together. We both thought it was absolutely insane, the idea of working together, right? We both sort of said, but we're married, we don't want to mess that up, yeah. I don't know that I love that idea. And it was truly my parents that were basically like, hey, jump off the cliff, you guys. Worst case scenario doesn't, you decide that you can't work together. But they saw, I think, a potential in us that we maybe didn't necessarily totally see in each other yet. And so I'm really, really fortunate to have their support and really, my mom is a lawyer. My mom was our lawyer for the first two or 3 years because we couldn't afford a lawyer. So when I say support, I mean 3 years of free legal advice support, which is real support, right?
Yeah, no, that's monetary. That's not that's not the love and feels, it's not like, oh, my parents were supporting us. My parents were my free life coach. You know what I mean? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about billable hours that mom kept to herself. You know what I'm saying? That's impressive. That is so cool, because that is how it starts, right? That support, that people seeing in you, which is funny you say that, because the reason I own my company today after 11 years is because my wife saw in me that I needed to do that at a time where I was just sort of like, what am I doing with my life? Why do I have a corporate job that sucks? Why do I hate what I do? And so she had come to me and done it. But we worked together, Lauren. We've been together 20 years. We work together. People are like, how do you do it? Well, my wife and I, we take I joke, we take 95% of the same breaths, we share the same oxygen. So we're always, it's proximity. We work here, we live here. You guys probably a little different because you have different parts of your business that takes you outwards, right? So you do community outreach. He deals with back end, whatever that setup is, right? You have your roles, but it wasn't easy to find those roles probably in the beginning, was it, Lauren?
1,000%. I think that in and of itself has been a journey. We also started Embark at the very end of 2019, basically at the beginning of 2020. We started constructing the first dispensary. So timing was super wild, right? I mean,
nothing happened in 2020, right? There wasn't anything weird, no big deal, right? That would disrupt their business. No.
It was not completely freaking terrifying, right? You poured every penny that to your name. I mean, truly, we had hired 2 employees to work alongside us. I think in the very beginning, we were probably paying them out of our, our same checking account that we used to buy our groceries, which, fun fact, is frowned upon. So we had to professionalize quickly, but.
Agreed. I didn't know that either, right? When I started off, I was like, my wife's like, hey, different credit card. I'm like, what do you mean? Same credit card. Just use it for business, write it off. She's like, no, dude, it's a household and a business credit card. And I was like, I don't like your distinctions. I think we should just keep it as a credit card.
Yeah.
So she's like, cool, call your accountant. And
exactly. But I think, that was a wild time in so many ways. But I think that forced us together in an entirely different way, right? I mean, we were all just forced into close proximity to folks in a different way than ever before.
Yeah.
But I think that's exactly what we needed. We needed that unification, that singular focus in order to get the first store open, because it was a Herculean, that's Herculean when you're self-funding.
But not only self-funding, but self-funding during that time, Lauren. We just can't underscore where you're at when everything is insane. People can't go to work. Construction companies are upping prices. Everything is already starting that sort of, COVID crunch financially.
Oh, yeah.
But you said it, and I circled it here, forced. And then I think COVID forced a lot of things to happen. I think COVID fast forwarded a lot of things that would have taken longer, Lauren. I think that your example is perfect. I think had you had other shit going on, had you not been, it may have taken you an extra 2 months, 3 months, who knows? Because this was all you could do. And so it's all you did, right? Yep. And there was no night out. There was no, it wasn't. So yeah, I think it's weird. I look back on it already with 4 years, far more fondly than I'm living through it. But I launched a whole new product set for my company that I would have never launched otherwise had I not couldn't go out to my hikes, couldn't go out to play. You know what I mean? I was stuck in the house. I was like, well, let's just create, right? So that's a badass story to be forced into it and then to see it work. When is Embark's first store open?
So we opened in June of 2020. So if you think back to sort of that moment in time, right? In March, we're in the middle of construction. It's again, self-funded first store. So you're running out of money quick, right? Yep. It's change order after change order that you're, combating your contractor on, right? And then this total uncertainty hits. And so there's this moment where, before you feel forced, there's this moment where you feel like you have to make a decision, right? Do we keep going or do you press pause? Because remember, none of us had any answers then. We had no idea what was coming. So that was super interesting. And I think for me, I had this real blind belief, which looking back, I'm so grateful to have had. It was probably delusional. I can wholly acknowledge it was totally a delusional blind belief, but I sort of just had this blind belief that, we were going to figure it out. And there was a greater good to all of this. There was a purpose. Why, not in the religious context so much as you're in this moment.
With blind belief. Yeah. You start with blind belief. And I think that's a way of, I say that too, Lauren. And I think it's a way of just sort of us saying, we kind of knew it. Yeah. Within our guts, within our intuition, who we are as humans, what follows us, right? I'm not a religious guy. I believe in something much larger than myself. I'll give you that, right? My wife is as metaphysical as it gets. On the other side of this camera is just thousands of dollars of crystals and the whole world that exists around it. And every day she tries to make me better. And I love her for it. And it's all a part of that idea, right? And I think you did know it. And I don't think it was delusional. And I don't think it was out of anything but you fully knowing right here where it matters most that I'm going for this shit because I got this.
Yeah,
So,
or I'll die trying. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like,
That's the belief. But that's the belief. So to me, not a disbelief. To me, it's the belief that at the end of the day, you are going to make this shit happen. And that's what makes CEOs. That's what makes companies. And they'll tell you that the best CEOs and best companies are made under pressure. By that, I mean financial crises, COVID, you name it. These big impacts, when people make it out the other side, Lauren, they are better for it. So that's awesome. You should be very proud of not only what you've done today, but even that decision right there to just continue down your road. Most people bail, and pausing wasn't really an option either because you had to run out of money pausing. So
100%.
you had to keep the whole thing going downhill, whether it came up or not. So June of 2020, we opened our first store. We're still having to wear masks. We still have all these mandates. What does it look like?
So our store is basically on state line separating California and Nevada in South Lake Tahoe. So we're, you could spit and hit state line in the casinos. So that was super wild, right? Because you're now dealing with the fact that two states are treating COVID differently, right? There's the perception, and this is a bit of a generalization, right? But the general perception in each of these states is a bit different. As a result, the rules look a bit different. We're operating in California. We have to operate under California law, obviously, right? But you have a lot of folks who are coming over from Nevada who expect not to be mandated to wear a mask and expect not to have, distancing requirements. And so when I say that our team was on the front lines, certainly not, of course, not at all compared to, nurses and doctors and first responders and things. But in terms of being cannabis retail, right? They were on the front lines. There was a real philosophical challenge that we were experiencing every single day in that store. And so I will forever be grateful because that team navigated it with so much grace. But I think, I look back and it was absolutely terrifying to be pushing through during that time, economically and otherwise. But I'm so grateful. Just personally, I'm so grateful for that experience. My husband, Dustin, and I moved up to South Lake Tahoe for almost 6 months to literally, as our construction crew started crumbling and everything was falling apart, we moved there to physically build and finalize and open the store. And we had a team member. We had hired one team member who, God love her, she left her family and her home and she moved up to South Lake Tahoe with us, and she moved into a house with her bosses, right? And the three of us just opened that store together. And as I look back on that time, it was kind of the coolest time ever, which makes me feel like an asshole, right? Because it was also COVID and people were dying and the world was being reshaped and changing in so many ways. But, we were in this little town on the side of a mountain overlooking a lake, opening a weed shop and bringing weed to people every day at a time when they were so scared and uncertain. So it was kind of awesome.
It is kind of awesome. And it's kind of full circle for me because the last place I was in March of 2020 was at a casino in Tahoe watching one of my favorite bands.
No way.
Last thing we did, and we got caught in a snowstorm, almost died trying to get over the mountain to get to Reno to fly out the next day.
Oh my God.
I didn't realize anything about chains. The car I had rented was a 2-wheel drive. I wasn't even supposed to be up there. No, we're still not even sure. We joke about it every day. We're not even sure how we survived. But and that was March of 2020. And I remember being in a dispensary in Tahoe where we were staying and hanging out. And I thought, there's not enough of these here because the line I waited in was ridiculous. And I was just like, this is like a tourist town. How can there not be more options? Lo and behold, here you are working just south, probably on the edge, like you said, right on the border there. I forget the name of that casino, but it was a good time. It was a good time until
it made it. You literally survived. So we're glad you're here.
We all survived it. We got it. And you're right. I say it to people all the time that I feel bad, but COVID just kind of changed my life in a way that was super good for me and allowed me to really focus in on things differently. And I know, yes, people died and I'm with you. All that's terrible, but there's still good that can come out of bad. Otherwise we wouldn't know one without the other, right? So your story is amazing when it comes to that location. Let me ask you if it's fair and you tell me if it's not, but when you open a location June of 2020, you guys, you get it running, everything's going. For those out there who think they can just open a dispensary and turn profit, Lauren, can you give people an idea of when one turns a profit on a dispensary?
I mean, at the risk of being so annoying, it completely depends on the million decisions you've made to get to that point. And I think that's what's so tough is, especially when you're doing it the first time. I'm fortunate. I had worked in a couple cannabis retail environments before starting Embark. And so I always say, like, the best thing I did was learn so many lessons, good and bad, from both of those experiences. And I think the thing that, especially if you think back to that time, sort of 2018 to 2021, although we still see some of it now, particularly I think in California, but we are also seeing this in some of the newer markets that are emerging. There was this weird belief that, you were just going to print money, right? Like, kind of almost like that this was a tech company. And so you saw people engaging in deal structures that make no sense, paying rent that are 2 or 3x market rate because they're a cannabis, we're going to make it all back and then some. I hear that. I still talk to operators today with frequency, or prospective operators that are, wanting to kind of get advice, and like the first thing I do is I'm like, open up your books, like open up the, like, sorry, but open it all up and let
understand it down to the penny, right? So like, you can't operate anymore on these wide margins, especially in cannabis. I think people assume that, they see the movies, they see the drug dealers. It's not like that. These are businesses that take high-end expense, that don't have tax write-offs, that don't have the same advantages that other businesses have. It just isn't as easy as it looks. But you're right on the books part. Same thing I tell young entrepreneurs when I speak to them as well. I'm like, hey guys, look, figure out how to start a business with $100. I don't care what it takes. Just figure out what an expense of $100 a month, what you could get. When we started our company, I didn't pay myself for the first 2 years just so we could bring on super talented help. And I also allowed us to do, we were all satellite this was 2013. So who knew how hip I was in 2013, making sure everyone didn't have to go to an office, only because, Lauren, it's overhead. It's mad overhead, right? So when you start to look at footprint, we only have a little bit here on the first part, but when you looked at footprint, how important was size of footprint, square footage to you from a maximizing standpoint, as opposed to like trying to have some, gigantic, show off scene or whatever the case was? How did you make the decision?
That's the biggest place I coach sort of on, prospective cannabis entrepreneurs is really getting tight on how much space you need. We are not superstores. We are not Costco's, and there's absolutely no reason that we should be. Our stores range, our smallest store, because the location matters. Our smallest store is about 1,600 square feet, which is really rough. Like, that requires a lot of optimization. Our largest store is probably 3,500 square feet, again, because that location was really important to us. But I think, I look at these stores, and even more than the square footage, I look at the money spent on the build out, and it's just, to your point about how quickly can you break even? Well, when you start 3 million in the hole, that's a long time.
Yeah, never.
A long
The
time,
answer is
right?
never. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think people want to go flashy. I think they want to go big, or they got to have this. And I think what you find in build outs is simplicity. I think that's, to me, my favorite spots to go into. I mean, we were on a killer road trip one time from California, from like, a buddy of mine got married in Santa Cruz. We went all the way up to Portland, and we were just outside of Santa Cruz, and we had a breakfast, and across the street was just this tiny little shop. I mean, literally like a mom and pop cannabis store, and it was so awesome. Like, you just walked in, and there were glass shelves, and there were jars, and there were all these things. I don't even know if it was a legal spot, Lauren. I'm being honest with you. It was definitely during legal times, but I don't remember. And I don't really, at the time, I didn't care. Now I care. Now I try to just support legal businesses because I'm in the legal business. However, I live in a prohibition state, so they don't make it easy on me, Lauren, that's for sure. Lauren, we are going to be getting into part 2 here, which I'd like to be all about you. So why don't you tell the folks a little bit of teaser what we're going to be talking about in part 2?
All right. In part 2, we're going to be talking about something that has never happened before in the world until about 4 weeks ago, which is when we allowed for sales and consumption at the California State Fair. So for the first time in history, cannabis was sold and consumed at a 170-year institution And importantly, as part of that, there was a competition and award show that really allowed us to celebrate cannabis as the agricultural product that it is. So a huge moment, I think, in destigmatization, huge moment for our cannabis community to come together and celebrate one another. It was awesome.
Well, that look at the tease right there. I mean, can you imagine what we're going to be talking about here? And Lauren and her team were on the front lines of making this stuff happen. You're going to want to tune in. Thank you guys for joining us on the first half. Thank you to our man, Peter Schweda and the Colorado Seed Inc. folks. We really appreciate you helping growers at the most important stage, and that is the genetics. If you haven't checked Peter out, head over to coloradoseedinc.com. There you can shop all their genetics. And if you haven't met Peter or follow him, do it. He's awesome, and he just really gets our space. So I really appreciate it. Lauren, thank you so much for the first half. I look forward to getting into the second half here coming up. And don't forget, Lauren had kind of touched on it a little bit, but the goal of this show, as always, is to remove the stigma and uplift this plant to its rightful place in society, as our man Dustin said on episode 1 of this show. We thank him for that, and we thank you for joining us.